Yeah, man. Greetings once again. Abba Ayalew Amlak, Herusekeng Amun, uSilo Samanzi uzinyo lengwenye uboya bengwe. Uchaya ingwe umbona utukuthi umandlana udla umvubu ukhipha utyete. Isinqwa semfene uwe uqeqe ugasikekeke. Yavuya indoda enenyeke kuba yona ithwele inyama ngomlomo. Yavuya indoda enesifombo kuba yona ihamba ithwele ithanga ngomqolo. Ndikushaya ingwe ke bakwethu ndizalwa ngumambhele mna. Ukubona umafungwenye udlambulo unombikazi undaba ezitha ukumabongwa nazigushu umpunduzi ngazingangiwa izimzime eladla amakhanda amadoda abanye bedla inyama abantu baselengeke labo ababasa ngamathambo abantu bebasa ngamazimba ngamabheleke lawo bakwethu mama ndingumzukulwana ke kophungula mna komdlovu onomasikisiki inyoni yezwe inyoni esindwa sisila sayo bakwethu sila namhlanje sibuyile kwindaba enkulu Kgangkgolo Mmudu wataba the roots of the issue sihanjelwe by a very special guest sizoxoxa la about who we are, what we are, and how can we go forward as a nation, as a people, you know. I won't introduce you. I'd like you to introduce yourself, Dr. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's truly an honor to be here in the space and to feel the vibration in the space. Nongene ekhayeni, ngiyabonga kakhulu. Igama Nduduzo Makhathini, ukusuka ngokwenzalo le ekulomzimba. Isembubu in Pietermaritzburg kushuthi-ke umuntu ngokwalenzalo yalomzimba ezalwa uMasibiya noNtuli. uNtuli besuka njalelele omphemba ombele ikhehla-ke elingizalayo basuka-ke bagcina sebesemkhumbana. Yilapho-ke ugogo ongizalayo uMangubane esehlangana nomphemba-ke kuthiwa wadidwa isigebengu sasemkhumbane. Kushuthi-ke
umphemba ngamadoda abantu libhelekelelo hawu owakithi moswena
kunjalo kushuthi-ke ekukhuleni-ke uNtuli yena ukhuliswa uMakhathini okwenza ukuthi ngihlonipheke isibongo nanokuthi ngikhulele ekhaya kwaMakhathini. Kushuthi-ke ngokuqhubekayo kwempilo ngagcina sengihlala nesalukwazi uMama Dlala ozala uMashange ozala-ke uMasibiya uma ongizalayo. Kushuthi-ke ngenxa-ke yokuthi amakhehla akubona abantu abakhona-ke emndenini for the most part pretty much absent, and I think this is maybe one other thing mhlambe ezofuna siyikhulume about the place of man in a black family. I mean, given all the catastrophes that have disrupted such a structure, and it's quite inspiring that our conversation today before the cameras started with the structure and how do we said we're pushing away from the word liberate, but how do we conscientize ourselves toward a system, a black system, a Bantu system? What are those systems? So, you know, I'm born in the early 80s during very critical times in South Africa, but particularly in Pietermaritzburg. Kungelona udlame kuphela nekhukhula unomkhubulwane eflathele. So coming from such a time period and contemplating the sonic and the ways in which it created an alternative dimension that perhaps is worth acknowledging that one is here in this moment. Because then I'm brought up in these transcendental traditions that were kind of invoking sounds as producing these other homes. And it's these homes that are refusing language and that we're grappling with to this day in terms of thinking about what really kept us safe from such a time. It's unimaginable. I mean, I remember my first day of school, Emaqongo. Now we had moved to Mkhanyakude, where the kind of conflicts between Inkatha and the NC were kind of very strong. I mean, as a young kid, like doing my first grade, and I was studying for the second time because I was Sugembo, as we taught, getting to this place where, you know, the gunshots were the soundtrack of the time, you know. And
Gunshots and screams.
And screams. Screams. A big part of it was screams, the laments, and just glimpses of song in between. I remember being at school and we already knew if there was any gunshot that was heard, kwafanele silale phansi ngezisu sonke. And you know, we were told that after the last gunshot is 20 minutes before you could get up. So, and of course, there was a shooting in the school. There was blood all over. So, glale gazini, zonke lezo zinto, and only to get up, maybe it's like a couple of people that got up in a class. Those days, the classes used to be like 60, and only 3 kids. And to get home, and the home is bent down. So I think in trying to really think about origin, at least in this body, we cannot escape these traumatic moments. And this, you know, igazi, elihamba nalokho, and looking at the sonic as the space for healing and cleansing in many ways. And this is where I focus most of my energy, in this space of cleansing.
Yeah, growing up during those times. You triggered certain memories I think I've suppressed.
Right.
I was in primary school now, and fortunately enough, like Pitori, it was still hard in those days, you know, but there was some space to maneuver.
Right.
Because I went to a Catholic school, you know, right in the middle of town. But I remember a couple of bombings, like Pitori, you know, and I remember the Sanlam building, which was on the other block from the school. It was, the top floors were burning, and it was all this conflict. And going home, I used to take the train. And a train, it's a train is long, but kuba ne-courage like training where kesonto. It's always church and preaching and then if you go past that, it's another church, but it's a different kind of church. And that church made sense for me.
Right.
It's the same singing, same preaching, but now instead of singing uJesu phakeme, laba bathi shibale 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 New Canada, habu utambo tambo. Man. So it's song, but I could resonate and hear more this type of music, more than this type of music. Primary school was in ngomzabalazo. You don't understand. But the song captured me. The song, Eyamdonsa. So that was the courage bengigibela kuyo mangiyesikolweni noma ngibuya esikolweni. I-courage lomzabalazo, the second last courage training. And I always made sure ukuthi noma ngimile platformini ngiyoma lapho ukuthi ngicele. But now, kule courage, I'm starting to hear now people talk. Yemani nabantu babizana comrade. Babizana comrade labantu. Akunababa usibanibani or mama usibanibani la. Bonke labantu abo comrade. Comrade. Kusho ukuthini? Being an inquisitive child, you look up comrade in the dictionary. Oh, it's a sincere friend, close companion. All right. So comrade, wonke umuntu ubizana comrade. But now nami sengibizwa comrade. Yila abantu abadala. How? Kanti comrade akanama age differentiation. And then I found out that no, comrade is comrade. Akunaminyaka. But then you start to hear now what you know. Apartheid, abelungu, bantu abamnyama. Oh wow, there's actually a divide. Because at school, I'm with white people. And siyaphila seklasini and it's we don't see this divide. But there's actually this divide. Now you start to look at things differently. You start to see there are these little nuances. There are these little separations. Even in this space, nesiTheThe, no, it's safe.
Right.
School level. But now, I'm thinking now, at my age right now, did I start to see these divisions because of the influence, la training? Or were these divisions really there? Before we go deep into music and, let's start with the scar that we all carry. The laying down on the blood, the gunshots, the bombs I experienced, the missions that I used to be sent on, the letters that I used to transport all over Pretoria in my train station, because I eventually became a comrade Mangani. I eventually became a respected part of that movement, Yomzabalazo. I wasn't in the IFP or ANC camp. I was in the liberation camp. So at that time, because I'm still apolitical, I don't go for any political party. But at that time, I wasn't even aware. I'm ANC, IFP, in. I was a child. All I knew was, okay, Silona Belu, in all form. So I grew up with that mentality. Now that I'm my age with my children and I'm sending my children to white schools, abantu abakhuluma isingisi bonke bayasizwa isiXhosa, bayasizwa kahle. You can give them instruction, conversation ngesiXhosa, but they won't respond to you ngesiXhosa. And I blame myself because ngibathathe ngabaseyikolweni zabelungu nami. Right. I want us to start there.
Right.
The race issue. This apartheid blaming thing, esinayo. No, it's because of apartheid. No, it's because of colonialism. No, it's because of this. Where does race put us? Isibeka phi indaba ye-race in 2024 going forward. And beautifully enough, it's the new season. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Our year.
Happy New Year.
Right.
We're starting a new year. We're starting a new
Wenduleka,
season.
siyenduleka.
Siyendula manje. Isikhathi sikamandulo manje. Inyanga yomsinthi kwaXhosa bese iqalile. Bathini libesiliwethe. Abetswana abesuthu nabetswana nabo bese beqalile. So we're in a new season. What is it that we are taking forward now based on the race question?
I think the race question is quite a charged question. I think there is no doubt, given the historical catastrophes, there is no doubt that race as a construct had an impact on how people live in the world. So I think that's one level of it, that it is a technology that became, um, it impacted on how our being in the world has been read for the most part for thousands of years. And I think as someone who's like a cultural practitioner, it is almost impossible to deal with the question of aesthetic or the question of artistic expressions and ignore the the biographies of the body from which the sounds enunciate. So for me, the question of race is complex when we think about the body. Like all of these kind of traumas that we spoke about, that we open with, are a result of this invention of race. But it is an invention.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Invention.
It's an invention.
I like that.
It's an invention. And it survives for as long as we subscribe to its technologies.
Sonkope.
So
It's an invention that survives as long as we entertain.
yes, we have to subscribe to it. And the ways in which we are forced to subscribe to it is by form of distraction, by a form of violence. Because, I mean, of course, growing up, there were still chases. I mean, there are still chases of these colonial kind of border lines. When a particular place in Pietermaritzburg in town said whites only, those are the ways in which you are forced to learn or to that's subscription. So that is why even the implementation of race was through violence. But I think as you are questioning about the future and where we're looking towards, the omission of violence will be by extension the omission of race. You know, but also that doesn't change the places of origin.
Wow.
And the fact that, you know, when we touch on places of origin, blackness is invoked. But I wonder what blackness would be when violence is completely omitted.
Because now, if we're going to talk about origins, and I said this once on a show, Kapenwell,
Right.
Uguti, and I got marauded for this. I got attacked from all directions. The title on the show, Kapenwell, and well, Kapenwell, the title was AmaZulu are white people. That's how he coined the title. But what I said in essence was, there are certain families within the Zulu nation that are originally genetically white. Let me expand on that. There are families kwaXhosa who are originally, historically, genetically white. There are families eLesotho who are like that. There are families eBopedi who are like that. There are families eSwatini who are like that. Here's the issue now. If these people, origin, genetics, historically, they were white people, but today they are as black as me and you. They speak isiZulu like me and you. They practice Isintu like me and you. But these people are white. Genetically, historically, biologically. But in appearance today, they are black. I've got a neighbor right here, my next door neighbor. He's a white man. He praat Afrikaans. Sy pa praat Afrikaans. Sy ma praat Afrikaans. Hy praat Afrikaans. Kinders praat Afrikaans. But this is him. This is his father. His grandfather is a colored man. This man is a Xhosa man, a black man. So what is him? Is he black or is he white? Because lo muntu lo, if manje we are going to talk idlozi, we are going to talk origins, we are going to talk genetics, we have to talk even about predecessors. Right? We have to talk about our predecessors. Now, our predecessors, so Mangpahla, example, I'm calling upon all my ancestors. I need Nyapahla and Chisimpepe. Engibiza nina nonke bogogo abahlangana egazini lami. Kuzovela umlungu la ubaba wakhe. Kuvela ikhaladi. And then kuvela amaXhosa all the way back. So in the white man's ancestry, there's only one white man. In a white man's ancestry, there is only one white man, his father. And his grandfather is mixed, and his great-grandfather is pure black. And everything after that, everything before this man, ngamaXhosa, bamnyama. What does it make him?
I think there are a couple of things that I'm kind of grappling with as you take us through this example. I think one of the things, the question of race itself, for me, has, in the way that I've explicated in the beginning, it has less to do with biology and science and appearance. I'm saying that the kind of race that has kind of violated us is the one which is a technology, a construct.
A construct.
A construct. And unfortunately, then it groups us as blacks. And I wonder even just the history of us as blacks, how recent
it is.
It is, so I think then the question of biology and science, I think that's a more kind of complex question. But I think when we're speaking earlier on, I was speaking about race in a sense of hegemony and periphery. How on the one hand, the one assumes power, and the one that assumes power actually is the one who is the technician, who creates, who produces.
Is the inventor.
The inventor who produces race.
And he's keeping us in his own loop.
Right. But in as far as biology is concerned, like, I think the only kind of race, again, that produces any color is black.
Now,
I mean, why?
Scientifically, they did say black cells or genetics are dominant.
Right.
And then white cells are recessive.
Right.
So in a union of these two, the dominant will always dominate.
Right.
But in a recessive situation, the recessive will dominate. But eventually the dominant will find its way. Scientifically, that's been said. And through the studies of eugenics, through the studies of race superiority, through the studies of, which were, by the way, byproducts of this construct. Right? Because if we're going to look biologically and historically and genetically, so many white families in power right now are genetically black. Because there is this scientific fact that's been said over and over.
Right.
The natural origin of all humanity is in Africa.
Right.
The oldest human specimens found to date is Ethiopia and South Africa. Right. Dinkernesh or Lucy in Ethiopia and Naledi in South Africa. Right. So if these two individuals were found in Africa as black people, let's just say, we don't know their race, we went there, but we will assume, based on the majority of the demographic, they were black. But they are the source of all. Does that not mean the whole world is populated by variations of black people?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it makes a lot of sense if the origin is black.
If the origin is one,
and black, I mean, if we think, I think there are many things. I mean, there's pigmentation as part of this equation. That, you know, black people can produce varied scopes of pigmentations. And so I think just from that fact, and we almost the only race that is able to have this
whole
much,
spectrum.
the whole spectrum. So I think for me, even though I'm not a specialist in DNA research, but I think it's not far-fetched to imagine that all races
come from this one source.
Yeah, definitely.
So between me and you, the whole race war, the whole race issue based on biology, isiko. A race is a construct.
Yeah, I subscribe more to the idea of race as a construct.
It's a construct, it's an invention.
And a way to organize and control populations.
No.
Because that, I have definitely suffered from that particular definition of race.
And we still experience
we're still experiencing that. I
I
go all around the world, and I know the difficulties of invisibility of this type of body. And so that makes that particular invention quite dominant, quite strong.
I think the question of race is answered.
Right.
Race is an invention, it's a technology,
Right.
it's a construct
Right.
created by individuals who want to keep control over a population.
Right.
That's it. It's not anything real, it's not biological,
Right.
it's not biotic, it's not inherent in us as humanity.
No. I definitely believe it's not. I think we would have to invent other words to describe what is inherent to humanity.
This is where I want us to go now.
That would have to be another conversation.
I want us to go now. Guti, race aside, let's talk about humanity. And the one thing that can actually bring humanity together: one, music; two, articulation of language; three, cooperative activities, building together, nation building. You're a musicologist by profession. Ngesixhosa ngizothi ulinxila lengoma by passion.
Right.
Because now there's one aspect of you that is the musicologist. But that comes later in life.
Very late.
It comes later in life. Not to disrespect that part of you, but it comes later in life. What came first was ingoma. What is ingoma?
Well, ingoma is a practice, a collective practice that brings together being in the world, sound making processes, healing practices, divination practices, notions of truth, as they would say, goma. And so I think it's one component. I think in its essence, it's really oriented towards vital force. It's oriented towards Ndu. It's the vibration that lives in everything.
Wow.
It's the musicality of being.
Wow.
And so the Chabula again, now when we switch to musicology, is dealing with music. Whereas Ingoma doesn't deal with music, it deals with the musicality as an organizing principle. That's why the healing in itself as a practice is a kind of musicality that moves one from out of tuneness into some kind of in-tuneness. And that is why song and jamming, I mean, if you think about Bantu speaking communities, Ingoma would also refer to dance, it would refer to the actual jam. Elbizwa Ingoma as a jam. So so the switching from this kind of wholeness of what ngoma is to musicology, which tries to confine sounds within one aspect, and we reflect on the aesthetic side of music. So I think you are right in saying in the sequence of things we come from ingoma, and musicology becomes this difficult faculty, very tight, that can't really deal with the magic of ingoma. And also musicology is a practice that looked at us. It kind of exhibits, particularly ethnomusicology, where we were already seen as the other. So the idea of an ethno was a thing that came out of ethnography. It was a way of reading black cultures. And of course, there are various layers of violence in reading black cultures, because in a kind of scholarly way, stuff has to stop. It has to stop the motion in order to be studied. And hence the idea of a lab, where things almost have to be killed all the time to be reflected on. So I think the major difference here between ingoma and musicology is that ingoma is in motion.
It's alive.
It's alive. And musicology becomes a spectator that looks at ingoma.
And stops it at intervals to break it down and scrutinize it.
I mean, if we think about the musicological archives that were created, the earlier ones were created by mostly anthropologists, and also just people that had field notes that were not, they didn't have any profession. And that unfortunately now governs the literature that we cite, that we read, the criteria,
the curriculum.
But these people were not specialists in the first place. And if we think about the ways in which they would go to a particular village and ask the people, can you sing us ingoma yogufa? And people will say, but no one has
died.
But then the violence of creating this archive, that people will be made to sing all of these things that in themselves are linked to a much more deeper cosmological, they link to the calendar, and they were sung out of context. So the study in that branch of philosophy of musicology is already happening against a huge kind of violence that already ignored the Ngoma principles, which are based on the calendar, which are based on cosmic events, and song as a way of enunciating and announcing these particular moments.
You just reminded me of a poem I once wrote, a song sung out of tune.
Right.
And this poem speaks about, I was trying to encapsulate the life of a young man, a Lokshin, who is trying to find himself in a space where himself is not promoted. You understand?
I get it.
And to me, it looked and it sounded like a song that is sung out of tune. And anthropologically, for the sake of the, I don't want to call it science, but I'll use the word silence, but add vulgarity in front. For the sake of vulgar science, people were forced to sing mourning songs
out of context.
Right. And because song is cosmic, song is vibrational, song is frequency.
Song is emotion.
Song is emotion. Song is thought-provoking. Kunalento sithi ngesintu usinga.
Right.
Ukuthi singaziculela ingoma sihleli kumnandi. But what song are we singing? If we're singing a war song, khona lento ezophakama. And for a few hours after that, until that calms down, anything can happen. We are agitated. We are not angry. We are agitated because leangoma put us in a certain state of consciousness and a state of awareness that is uncontrollable to us consciously now, because Leangoma was sung out of place.
And so, of course, by extension, in listening to these archives, there is some kind of unconsciousness that comes
is
with
attached to it.
Yes, because the vibrational depth was violated. It's not there. And so these are really the troubles, I think, for the most part, in what I've been contemplating as study. So where is the trouble of study? Where does study gets violated? And this is just one example of the failure of study within the institution, for instance. And so Ingoma would have to live elsewhere, because the Ingoma it demands this motion, and this motion is not in an institution. It is related to an episteme that is based on walking as knowing. I mean, knowing by listening, or indlela ibuzwa phambili, knowing, walking as a way of developing,
experiencing
it. So I wonder, between these two places now that we've launched, on the one hand in Ngoma and the institution by extension in the musicological branch, the trouble that these songs are going through, and how they get suffocated by that location of the university,
of institutionalizing,
right? Because with that comes the regulation.
I was having a conversation with one of my students, uGogo, uMakhosazana, uNansele, and Nomamthembu, who is a psychologist. So ngithi kubo, you're both studying psychology from different perspectives. Right? Find a way to work together and bridge these two sciences. Because now, in the medical world, like Umama was a medical doctor as well, In the medical world, the first thing they look at is your history. What is your medical history? Who has exhibited these symptoms genetically? But then that is your parents and your grandparents, and beyond that, they can't go further. When uyinyanga, you can start from the grandparents and go even further. Find a way to bring that information with this information and put it together to fix what is wrong with the human being. Because you mentioned Uguti, health is part of music, is part of Ingoma. Because the body itself, I like to view the body as a violin, as a stringed instrument, with 12 different strings. The Chinese call them meridians. Biology science calls it nerves, and the central nervous system, and thina ke bantu abamnyama angithi thina sifundanga simaqaba. People think that we are not aware of nerves and the nervous system in the body. People think that we are not aware of certain connections which are biological, So what are nerves? What are these strings in the body of Mmudu? Imizwa. That's all it is. Imizwa. Because now, if one of these strings is out of tune, uthini, angizizwa kahle. Right? Umuntu ogulayo sithini, akazizwa kahle. Why? Because imizwa yakhe, it's not in harmony. The strings are not singing the right way. It's singing out of tune. So you need to realign lemizwa.
We need this realignment. And I think, Mkhulu, that brings us naturally to this idea of ritual. Because I think that is really central.
Enactment.
Right. This is very central. And as you say, I mean, it's very explicit within our etymology that we are sound people. Because masititina, lengane aisezo. We mean two things. We mean sensing, way of feeling, but we also mean sensing by way of sound. So we are sound people.
But not necessarily deafness.
No. Sound as vibration.
It's vibration.
That could be heard by people that we regard as deaf. It's sound that we can sight just by walking. Yeah. So when we take that word, ukuzwa, then take the word sound, umsindo, which has two components in it. Umsindo is a kind of heaviness, something that is heavy, or something that is dense, umsindo, and then a sound, right? And on the far opposite, we have ukuthula, silence. Ukuthula meaning now ukuthula lomsindo. So I think already, if we think about sounds within these, what these etymologies are kindly giving to us, we would land in a different place about thinking
we are speaking
ritual.
of things on a metaphysical realm now.
Right.
We are speaking of objects.
Right.
With weight. With presence.
Then masesiyake manje endabeni yokwelapha, in contemplating these two ideas, or rather three, ukuzwa, umsindo, ukwethula. Then size entweni yokugula. And of course, within ukugula, we're thinking about sickness, but within ukugula, in a kind of true meaning, as Zulu, is to store or house something, coming from the word igula, calabash. Right. So umuntu ogulayo is storing these things, right? It's this heaviness. Baze bathi ngesixhosa umuntu mabe egula unomsindo. Right? But unomsindo, there is conflict. But hey, unomsindo wena. Unomsindo. Waba nomsindo, yeah.
Naligama lesixhosa inkathazo. Yeah.
So I think this is like the ways in which our ancestors kind of, it's a gift from our ancestors just by using words. And these are some of the things that are missing within like musicological terminology. And that is the violence of omission, right? And this is why even when they say, okay, we've created a branch for black sounds under ethnomusicology, there is still a problem because they do not ask us, which is something we were talking about earlier on, which is because then the violence of inclusion is a challenge, because when we are included, we
have to sacrifice certain aspects of ourselves.
We go into a protocol that rejects us. And so in the way that I'm thinking now, I'm thinking about non-exclusionary, that we were not supposed to be excluded in the first place. Because this inclusion is a kind of troubleshooting.
Exactly. It's a response to the exclusion.
Yeah, it's a response to the exclusion. But now, as we have already seen, if we bring in notions of imsindo, notions of ukuthula, notions of ukwegula, I think we learn somewhere different. We learned really on Ingoma. Because Ingoma is more about the properties of sound. Not the aesthetic.
And the result thereof.
No. And so, if we're talking about metaphysics, it is fair to say Ingoma is the enunciation of a citation of something else. Okay. And this something else now opens up the Ndu cosmology.
Because even though it has words within, it does not necessarily need words to be articulated.
No.
It's something that needs to be said to all the levels of what we are as Untu.
Right.
Hey, you're taking me now to language.
Right.
which is another tricky thing.
Right.
Because language is also a part of sound, music, expression. And then we want to debate issues of indigenous language, pure language, African language, and this language and this. Can there, before we go back to the music and its connection, can there be, is it possible in this world, universe, cosmos, to have a pure language untainted by the next person?
It becomes impossible. I think it would take us back to the same question of race, about the different variations. It will take us back to that there could possibly be a mother language. And it's been very fascinating for me to just think about the word and just that sound and how its onomatopoeia kind of relates us back to creation story. And so as this first droplet of water that makes that sound. As the
bursting of a bubble.
Or the bursting or the break.
The breaking of something.
The breaking of something. So I think the languages that still carry the kind of onomatopoeia things are not necessarily languages in a human kind of register.
Okay.
They are languages in as far as cosmic concepts were happening and humans were kind of observing. It's based on observing. Imvula ithini. Right. It was based on that because it had to be a language that was spoken by animals, spoken by nature, spoken by human beings.
It had to be a language that
It had to be a cosmic language. So it had to be a cosmic language, which takes us then to some of the Bantu languages still carry these nuances. Masiti, for instance, umveli qala, and again we're invoking the qa as a kind of indexing the
because
beginning.
You cannot speak about umveli qala or umveli nqangi.
Right.
You cannot speak about that without defining isiqalo.
Without the break. Without the initial sound.
You understand?
Noqeda.
Nokuqhamuka. Nokukhama.
Noqamatha.
You
I mean, it goes all the way to even
so
the coin.
These words are not really words. They are expressions or definitions of an event, of a situation, of isehlo.
I think these belong to cosmic sounds. It belongs to the cosmic library. It's a cosmic library.
You remind me of the Ethiopians. Their language, oldest language, Gi'ez.
Gi'ez, yeah.
Gi'ez, they say, even if you can look at the script itself, Gi'ez, it's like lightning. It looks like lightning flashes and flashes of lightning. So the story is the first person who read or who came with the script of Gi'ez was Enoch, which we know as Utehuti, Utautau, Utothemis.
Sure.
He was observing lightning.
Right.
So it was not from a conversation with anyone.
No.
It was from an observation. But the same with the Arabs, with their language, they say they were observing fire. And this is why it looks like flames. And the Hebrews as well. So
it's observing cosmic events.
Language is an observation of cosmic events.
Right.
Which happen yonke indawo. La imvula iwakhona ithi qa. E-England ayithi khu.
No. I think our losing of a sense of, or just the much broader relationship with the cosmos is what has actually led to this out of tuneness and moving away from language as text and moving to language as
Identity,
as
as nationality,
as nationality,
as a race,
as a space of manipulation.
Yeah.
So I think it's a kind of these now most of the languages that exist are human made.
All of them.
Yeah.
I asked the
and now
question.
they can't really speak to cosmic things.
Exactly. My question is
And
this.
that's why umsamo is difficult.
That's why kunzima ukukhuluma lapha emsamo.
Kunzima umsamo.
Because I once said this ukuthi abantu mabakhuluma emsamo today bayathandaza.
Right.
And bathi bona bayaphahla. But the word pha liyazichaza. Kumele kube nalento ethi pha.
The spark, the break again.
Ithi hla.
Spreads.
Now you can't uthi uyokhuluma nogogo nabomkhulu. Uthi bogogo nabomkhulu ngicela umsebenzi, ngicela ngi. Uhla wakho,
The direction.
Uhla wakho uyapi? Ngoba umuntu omalapha emsamo akhulume. Umuntu omela ikhaya, azikhulumeli yedwa. And there's this tradition now yokuthi hayi hamba uyozicelela emsamo. Fika uzishisela impepho ekhaya. Fika ulayita ikhandlela nengamakhandlela nani. Kwenziwe leyo nto ke manje it's an elaborate situation now. Nama-fruit, nama-sweet, nayo yonke le nto. Nama-champagne, nama-wine. It's yeah. But lokupha uyapha, you are giving. And then ithi hla lento uyihlwayele.
That is so precise.
Lento iphayo or oyiphiwayo funeka uyoyihlwayela. How then do you go emsamo uzikhulumele wedwa? Who is listening to this individual cry? This is why about mabaphahla bayathandaza, because mawuthandaza
Isicelo.
for wena.
And umthandazo nawo uhlukile kunomkhuleko. Ngoba umkhuleko now ukuzibopha. It has a commitment.
You are binding yourself.
You're binding yourself in our commitment.
In our commitment.
Yeah, umkhuleko is a different concept.
Uthi mina bogogo ngizokwenza kanje la ekhaya.
Umkhuleko ugogo esikhulisa bethi ibhande likamoya. She used to like that kind of illustration. Masikhuleka ngoba sikhuleka sibaningi siyasibophelela into this kind of one vision.
This one vision.
Yeah.
Oh, Nkosi yami.
So leyo ke bingabe an individual prayer, it is more of a village, umthandazo wesigodi. Obiza umkhuleko. You know, it's a much higher
vibration.
Yeah.
And I was about to say, if we look at all of this, it's a form of ingoma.
No, it is. It's the musicality.
It's the musicality of it. Ukuthi manje, I'm here to connect all these elements, this water, this fire, this wind, this earth, in order to ask for a blessing for
the village,
the community, in order to accommodate everyone.
I think if we go back to the racial question as a construct, this is where most of the damage went in, from a communal to a singularity. And I mean, by extension, if we go back to the university as well, I've said various times that the idea of a uni is the problem. Because
it should have been diversity.
Yeah. Yeah, or, you know, as Mignola proposes, pluriversal. So I don't go to a university, I go to a pluriversity.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because within that pluriversity, there
is
are various
plurality of knowledge.
Yes, and we can go to whichever knowledge that you're seeking.
The problem with me was growing up. What do you want to be when you grow up? I couldn't answer that question.
No, it's difficult.
I couldn't answer that question. And even now, when you would ask me now, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'll tell you, I want to be God. And for the past, I don't know how many years, that's all I've wanted to be. I want to be like God. I want to be God. Now, God religious, no. God expression, yes. God nature, yes. God cosmical, yes. I want to be a being that understands my beingness.
Right.
If you're going to send me to university,
It's
now
limited.
you're limiting me.
You're limiting. Because there aren't options.
There aren't options.
Angisho, we're talking about abundance. Uthe ukuhlwayela.
Usiyahlwayela.
And masihlwayela si-invoke uNomkhubulwane.
Okay.
Already we're in the space of abundance.
We're in a space of diversity.
Yeah, abundance. And the trouble of university is that it lacks abundance. And by extension, the problem of colonization was to suffocate abundance. That was the major challenge, because we were people of abundance. And now, I speak to young people that, all around the world, I wanna visit Africa. Like, okay, any specific country? They probably don't even know that specific, right? And then one of the things is like, I want to help people there. So already the world understands us as a place of lack, whereas we have everything.
We have everything.
We have everything, but this kind of superimposition on this black subject will lead us to the notion of the township again, to think about black locations as places that were created to kind of harness
this abundance.
Right, but on the reverse, to be places of lack, where we're always lacking something.
I asked this question recently, Kutembe, ngithi, was it you or one? But recently, ngiyabuza ngithi, no, isiko is all about rich children and, it's all about the rich children and poor people. Besikhuluma izolo no haft. Ukuthi, which side of the fence experiences lack? Side A, there was never ever any money to start with.
So it's not lacking, it was just not there.
So whatever we do to live and survive is what we do and live to survive. Right. On side B of the fence, there were millions. Right. Everything was there. Who has a fear of lack? A or B? You understand?
I'll say B. Yeah.
Who will ever experience lack in any way or form? It's B. A will
never, the proximity to
exactly. So A will never ever say, "Hey, you broke namhlanje." Nigga, you've always been broke. So you can't say now I'm broke namhlanje. But now ngulo ongathi, hey, yazi namhlanje ngibroke.
Relative to
what he's
moment.
Used to.
Yeah.
Lo akakwazi ukuthi ngiyahlupheka. It's these rich people, these people who are enforcing this poverty construct to laba who don't have. Because now you start to think you don't have because you are comparing yourself to those who have. But what do they really have? That car, Mercedes-Benz, yakhe. That estate ahlala kuyo, Stein. Because it's inside Stein City. It's not inside Sonkope. It's Stein City. Awukwazi ukuhlaba inkomo lapha ku-estate yakho. You can't invite your whole family for a gathering there. You need to ask for permission. And in advance.
So it's not your space.
It's not your space. Kuyini ke ukuba umuntu? If we are going to live in these constructs, coming back to we are people of abundance. Now we are people of poverty. Yazi rain, just as based on the abundance and the poverty and how we got to the point of where we are now. Right. Imvula used to be the lifeline of the whole village. Imvula. Now people, when it rains, we curse it. And sinezangoma manje by the tens of thousands. Inyanga abantu abathi bathwasile by the tens of thousands. Once it starts drizzling, bashisa izinto zabo bayayixosha. Imihlaba yomili lele. Akulinywa. Emakhaya, it's the saddest situation. Akunantsimi elinyiwe. Bapha abafana bala ekhaya. Hayi baseGoli. Bayofuna umsebenzi. Hayi baseKapa. Bayofuna umsebenzi. Hayi baseThekwini. Bayofuna umsebenzi. Kodwa la ekhaya nangu umsebenzi.
Umsebenzi indaba yemvula.
Indaba yemvula. Now we cannot depend on imvula. I remember a time, or I know of a time, but let me be honest and say I do remember a time when imvula was called on command in Gengo.
That would have been my next thing, that like the technology of song in relation to imvula is very much evident in all black cultures. Asikho isigodi esingenazo ingoma zawo semvula. Zokuyolanda imvula.
Ubaba mina ongizalayo, my father, Nkosi uChayingwa, he sang the clouds to rain. This is why I say I didn't hear about this or ngayixoxela or ngayifuna. No. Ngubaba ongizalayo. Ngayibona ngamehlo. Ngubaba ongizalayo. What happened to those?
It brings us back to the place of ritual. I mean, one of the challenges of songs in this time period is that songs are performing. And the challenge of performance would have to then address the challenge of the body. While rituals, on the other hand, they move from the body, they move beyond. The performance is a failure in as far as black histories are concerned. And I think it's important as well to just say that even within what now we've been kind of moving with as an idea of black aesthetic, I think there is a challenge with that as well, because the regulations of beauty or aesthetic are still very much westernized, in a sense that we are told what is beautiful through all these forms: television, media, literature. We've been kind of learning beauty that is far away from our notions of beauty. So in coming to performance, the failure is the very fact of the body biographies, or at least within this branch of race that we've been kind of grouped in. So I think then the power of songs would have to come from something else. Because even if we think about the Black Atlantic or even the Transatlantic, the Negro spirituals and all, those were modalities of transcendence. Those were ways of invoking home in a moment of displacement.
In a moment of displacement.
Right. That was a technology of invoking home, a place elsewhere. So, and I think the challenge currently is that songs are performing. And in this moment of performance, they lack untu.
They lose the essence.
Yeah. Ubabu Ramose proposes this wonderful idea of what he calls the ontochaidic. The ontochaidic brings together three modalities of the living, and then they say the living dead, or the ancestors, and the ones to be born. So for us, a good song is a song that is able to open all of these dimensions in a single moment.
A good song is a song that can touch all these dimensions at once.
Right.
And open them.
Right.
To the experience of now.
Right.
Wow.
And that is the place that is lacking now to your question about, so what happened to those songs? If we're succumbing the songs to violence of performance, and I mean, it really comes strong when we go abroad and you start seeing like how the expectation of the audience is for an African body to perform. And they don't expect anything. And I've been saying more and more that like the kind of musical energy I'm dealing with refuses being washed. Because I'm playing ingoma ezinamehlo sifuna ukubuka bona. So they get scared when I say these songs refuse to be watched. Zinbhekile. And so what would it mean for you to sit there and be watched by these songs? It changes. Because when they're watching you, now you have to succumb to an invitation. And this is the invitation that is opened by this register of ritual in thinking about songs. And so I think as soon as we omit songs and we put them outside of the calendar, I mean, in West Africa, there are songs that are only sung every 7 years. You won't even hear someone humming that song because it speaks to a particular cycle. And so, I mean, now in thinking about how we perform songs out of context. No, because it belongs to a sacred practice.
Exactly. But today,
because that's the part that I want to think of as acoustic unconscious. When umsindo ungasathwele lutho,
when umsindo
usuthule awusathwele lutho. So there has to be always some kind of properties that are carried by sound. And the ritual state is what gives the vibration of ukuthwalwa kwemsindo.
Yazi kunenye ingoma la, I'm gonna mention it. And ngiyazi izangoma eziningi ezizobukela la. Sizothi awuqalile uyas-attack umkhulu.
Uzoqalwa yimini.
Kunale ngoma le angiyifuni. And number one hit yezangoma all over South Africa.
I'm thinking about that.
That's the song. Ngangigula. Ngathwasa. Ngalashwa. Ngiphilileke manje. Ngilo mkhulu engiwuye. Mangithi ngihawukele thonga lami ngisho ukuthini? Ngoba ngizenzanga ngenziwa abalele. Ukugula kwami kohlula odokotela, kohlula izibhedlela. Ngile nyanga engiyiyo. What am I saying? What do I mean by that?
And ukugula, you know, it's funny because earlier on you spoke about Western medicine against African medicine. And we keep coming to this word ukugula. And Mangilbega, I was thinking a lot about this during this lockdown period of COVID-19 and the ways in which a vaccine was a way of coexisting with the virus, for instance, and how African medicine wants to take What is to empty. Right. And the emptying would have to go through a process of surrender. Yeah. So in thinking about Abakhaliphi, for me also it suggests, because it has some biblical connotation. I don't think there is something entirely indigenous to Africans about it. Because this is the invocation of Christ as Papa again. All right. So I think in this kind of moment of coloniality and dealing with hybridity, which is something we went through, and the separatist churches coming in, Oshembe and the Zionist churches, which we are thankful for, because they captured some kind of essence of who we are, but we cannot escape hybridity. I think Lengoma comes in this moment of hybridity, where we with this idea of Christ coming into the equation, whereas Itongo is something else. Ubaba Mutwa describes it in a different way, because Ubaba Mutwa, he says to dream or Pupa is to be one with the star gods. Okay, that's Ubaba Mutwa's definition. And so
is to leave this realm of physicality, of limitation.
Yeah. So such a word as uKhangkgolo would not necessarily be relevant. It's also a state, it's a heightened state. It's a state where we are able to create things. So mangabethi umuntu usemathongweni,
is in a state of creation, or creative energy.
It's creative energy. It's again vital force. It's not a state.
Ama-scientists basahlulekile namanje ukuphendula umbuzo lona.
Yeah.
And ngizothi so tata nje just a break. Slowly inyawo and then sizobuya siqedelele. Last thing engizoyisho, scientists have failed to answer this one question. How the pyramids were built. How all those big blocks of stone were moved. And they're speculating, no, it was aliens, no, it was vibrational frequencies, no, it was antimatter, no, it was anti-gravity technology. No. The simplest explanation I will give is sholoza, sholo. That's the simplest explanation I will give to how the pyramids were built. Lamadota maweculu shosholoze mine. They are doing heavy work that they would not have been able to lift normally. But the song, Liangoma, it made them forget about the weight, made the weight, shifted the gravity within the weight, within the object, and made it easier to carry. Oh, kubula, zash, kubula, zash, kubula. Eventually, we fall into the rhythm of what we are sounding, not the object we are lifting. What is at work here is frequency and vibration, not strength. There are certain songs where umuntu mayizicula, the body itself gets heavy. And then there are certain songs when you sing, the body itself gets lighter. So when we come back, I want us to talk about how song as a technology, right, can be used in culture, can be used in self-development, can be used in shaping a better future for our children. Because where was the problem? We identified the problem, we identified the vulgarization, we identified the issue of performance.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a serious challenge.
It's theatrics.
It's theatrics, yeah.
Theatrics.
Even in the church.
Yeah. It's theatrics everywhere. How can we come back to being genuine?
So